Hi, it's Mark Donegan. Most copywriters chase clever hooks, but the highest converting sales letters start with the unspoken problem your buyer can't articulate yet. That's the problem solution lead, and it works because it proves you understand the customer before you ever pitch. After 2 decades of building go-to-market strategies for B2B tech companies, I've watched this framework win deals others left on the table. Tim and I unpack how to use this framework so your copy connects and converts.
Tune in, listen up, it's marketing time. Bright ideas sparking, blowing your mind. From strategies to big exec dreams, catch the buzz and join the execution. Marketing Convo.
Welcome to the Marketing Execution Podcast. This is the show for tech founders and leaders building B2B products and technologies. We show you how to go further, faster to get the business results you need.
From strategies to big exec dreams, catch the buzz and join the execution. Marketing Convo.
Mark, I've been sitting with something all week that I can't shake. You know how we're always talking about hooks and attention-grabbing headlines and all that sexy stuff? Well, what happens when you just can't find one? Like, what do you do when you're staring at a blank page and nothing clever is coming to you?
Oh man, Tim, you're hitting on something that literally every founder I've ever worked with has experienced. That moment where you're like, I know my product is great. I know it solves a real problem, but I cannot for the life of me figure out how to open this sales page or this email or whatever it is.
Right, and it's paralyzing, honestly. You end up just not writing anything.
Exactly. And here's the thing. There's actually a time-tested solution for this exact situation. It's called the problem solution lead. And I think it's probably the most underrated approach in direct response copywriting.
Okay, break that down for me. What makes it different from just, talking about benefits or features?
So the key distinction here, and this is really important, is that you're not starting with your product. You're not starting with how amazing your solution is. You're starting with the problem. But not just any problem. You're starting with what I call the below the surface problem.
Below the surface? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so think about it this way. If someone's looking at, let's say, an online learning platform, the obvious problem is they want to learn new skills. That's surface level. But the real problem, the one that keeps them up at night, it might be that they feel like they're falling behind in their career, or they're worried they're not creative enough. Or, and this is a big one, they keep procrastinating on actually improving themselves.
Oh, wow. So you're going for the emotional core and not the logical surface.
Exactly. You're going for the unspoken worry, the thing they might not even admit to their friends. And when you nail that in your opening, something magical happens. The reader feels seen. They feel like you actually understand them.
Which builds trust immediately.
Yes, 100%. And trust is everything, especially for founders who don't have a massive brand yet. You can't rely on name recognition, so you have to earn attention by demonstrating empathy.
Okay, so let's get tactical here. How do you actually structure this? Like if I'm a founder listening to the Marketing Execution Podcast right now and I want to use it tonight, what do I do?
All right. So there are basically 5 steps, and I'll walk through each one. First is the headline. And there are some really solid templates that work consistently. Things like, if you have this problem, then here's the solution. Or, do you have this specific problem? The key is that the headline itself acknowledges the pain point right away.
So you're qualifying your reader immediately.
Exactly right. You're basically saying, hey, if this is you, keep reading. If it's not, no hard feelings. And that actually increases conversions because you're attracting the right people.
That's counterintuitive. Most founders want to cast the widest net possible.
I know, and it's one of the biggest mistakes I see. Wide nets catch nothing. Specific hooks catch customers.
Okay, what's step 2?
Step 2 is the opening, where you introduce the problem with vivid, relatable language. You're painting a picture here. You want the reader to feel like you're describing their exact situation. Use specific details. Don't say you're struggling with productivity. Say something like, you've got 17 tabs open, your to-do list keeps growing, and you haven't finished a single project this month.
That's literally me right now.
See, it works. When you're specific, people see themselves in your copy.
And then you deepen it, right? That's step 3?
Yeah, step 3 is about impact. You're not just stating the problem, you're showing the consequences. What happens if they don't solve this? Maybe they keep falling behind. Maybe they miss opportunities. Maybe that nagging feeling of not being good enough just keeps growing. You're adding urgency without being manipulative.
There's a fine line there, though, isn't there, between empathy and fear-mongering?
Absolutely. And the difference is honesty. If you're describing real consequences that your audience actually faces, that's empathy. If you're inventing catastrophic scenarios to scare people, that's manipulation. Your audience can tell the difference, trust me.
So we've got headline, opening, impact. What's next?
Step 4 is the transition. And this is where a lot of people mess up. You need a clear pivot from problem to solution. Simple phrases work great here. Things like, but what if there was another way? Or finally, there's a solution. Or just introducing. It sounds basic, but that transition is crucial for shifting the reader's emotional state from frustration to hope. And then you present the solution. Right. And here's the thing, you're still not going feature crazy. You're highlighting how your solution alleviates the specific pain points you just described. You're connecting the dots for them. You showed them the problem, now you're showing them the relief.
And you mentioned using numbers and testimonials?
Yeah, if you have them. I once heard of a company that increased their conversion rate by 40% just by adding one specific customer testimonial that described the before and after transformation. Social proof is powerful, but it has to be relevant to the problem you opened with.
And then the call to action at the end.
Keep it simple and specific. Try it now. Learn more. Start your free trial. Don't make them think about what to do next. Tell them.
You know what I love about this framework? It works even when you have no clever hook. You're just being honest about the problem.
That's the beauty of it. You don't need to be clever. You need to be true. And that's actually more powerful.
Mark, that's fascinating. Let's pivot for a second and talk about how this changes when you're selling to enterprise customers versus consumers.
You know, that's actually where this whole framework gets really interesting because the mechanics stay the same, but the emotional landscape shifts completely.
How so?
Well, think about it. When you're selling to a consumer, you're usually talking to one person making a decision for themselves. But enterprise, you've got committees, you've got stakeholders, you've got people whose careers are on the line if they make the wrong call.
So the below the surface problem changes.
Completely. With consumers, it might be, I feel like I'm not creative enough. With enterprise buyers, the unspoken worry is often, what if I champion the solution and it fails? What does that mean for my next performance review?
Oh, wow. So you're not just addressing business pain, you're addressing career risk.
Exactly. And this is why so many B2B founders miss the mark. They write copy that talks about efficiency gains and cost savings, which matter, sure. But they forget that behind every purchase order is a human being who's thinking, is this going to make me look smart or stupid?
That's such a shift in perspective. I mean, we talk about B2B like it's this rational, spreadsheet-driven world.
Right? But it's not. I know of a company that was struggling to close enterprise deals for months. Their product was solid, their pricing was competitive, but their messaging was all features and ROI calculation.
Let me guess. They changed the hook.
They changed everything about how they open conversations. Instead of leading with, our platform reduces operational costs by 30%, they started with, you've probably been burned by software implementations before. The ones where you spent 6 months getting buy-in only to watch the whole thing fall apart during rollout.
And that resonated?
Their response rates doubled because they were finally speaking to what enterprise buyers actually worry about. Not the numbers, the experience, the fear of wasted effort.
Though the problem-solution framework still works, but you're targeting a different layer of emotion.
Right. And here's the thing that really matters for founders listening right now. This isn't about manipulation. It's about recognition. When you name the thing someone is secretly worried about, you create this moment of, oh, they get it. They've been where I am.
And that's the trust-building piece you mentioned earlier.
100%. Look, every buyer, whether they're purchasing a $12 subscription or a $200,000 enterprise contract, they all have the same fundamental question. Does this company understand my situation?
So the hook isn't really about being clever at all.
No, that's the whole point. The best hooks aren't clever. They're true. They're specific. They say the thing that your prospect has been thinking but hasn't heard anyone else articulate.
I love that. The thing they've been thinking but haven't heard articulated. And when you do that, you don't need fancy wordplay. You don't need gimmicks. You just need to demonstrate that you've done the work to understand their world, which brings us back to research, right? You can't name the below the surface problem if you don't know what it is.
Absolutely. Talk to your customers. Talk to prospects who didn't buy. Ask them what kept them up at night before they found a solution. The answers will surprise you.
Okay, so we've covered the framework. We've talked about why it matters differently for enterprise versus consumer. I'm sitting here thinking about founders who are going to pause this episode and try to write something tonight. What do they actually do with all this? Let's get into the practical application.
Okay, so here's the first thing I want everyone to do right now. Grab a piece of paper, write down one sentence that describes the surface level problem your product solves. Just one sentence, just one. If you sell project management software, it might be teams struggle to keep track of tasks across multiple tools. Now here's where it gets real. Below that sentence, I want you to write the word why in all caps, and then answer it. Why does that problem actually hurt?
So you're digging deeper.
Exactly. And you keep asking why until you hit emotion. So teams struggle to track tasks. Why does that hurt? Because things fall through the cracks. Why does that hurt? Because a project manager looks disorganized. Why does that hurt?
Because they're worried about their reputation, their job security.
There it is. That's your below the surface problem. That's what goes in your hook.
So the exercise is basically 5 whys applied to customer pain.
Yep. And I know this sounds basic, but most founders skip it. They stop at the surface. They write, our tool helps you manage projects better. And that's fine, but it doesn't grab anyone. Step 2 is testing your hook against real language. Go into G2 reviews, Reddit threads, LinkedIn comments. Find where your customers complain about their current situation. Look for their exact words, because when you use the same phrases they use, they feel understood instantly.
Okay, so we've got the 5 whys exercise. We've got mining real customer language. What's the third piece?
The third piece is structure, and this is where a lot of founders get stuck. They know the problem, they have the language, but they don't know how to arrange it. Here's the simplest template. If you have this problem, here's a solution. That's it. Fill in the blanks.
It feels almost too simple.
It is simple, but simple works. Calendly basically built their entire early growth on this structure. If you're tired of the back and forth of scheduling meetings, here's a link that lets people book time with you directly. Problem, solution, done. And here's another template that works great for enterprise. You've probably been burned by blank before. The kind where blank happens. That's your opening. Then you pivot to, we built something different.
So you're naming the bad experience first. You're saying, I know what you've been through.
Exactly. So the practical takeaway here is start with recognition, not explanation. Your hook should make someone nod before they even know what you're selling.
I love that framing. Recognition before explanation.
And look, you're gonna write bad hooks at first. Everyone does. The key is to test them. Send 2 versions of the same email, see which one gets replies. Run 2 ad variants, look at the click-through rate.
So iteration is part of the process.
It's the process. The founders who win at this aren't the ones who write perfect hooks on day 1. They're the ones who write 10 versions, test 5, and keep the 2 that work.
Okay, Mark, we've covered a lot of ground today. The framework, the emotional layers, and now the practical steps. Can you bring it all together for us?
All right, we started with a simple truth. You don't need a clever hook to write great copy. What you need is honesty about the problem your customer faces. The problem solution lead works because it goes beneath the surface. You're not just naming the obvious pain, you're naming the unspoken worry, the thing that keeps people up at night. For consumers, that might be feeling like they're falling behind. For enterprise buyers, it's often a career risk, the fear of championing something that fails. Then we got practical. Use the 5 whys to dig down to real emotion. Mine customer language from reviews and forums. Structure your hook with simple templates that put recognition before explanation. And test everything.
Mark, after everything we've covered today, what's the one thing you really hope people don't forget?
You know what? Your customer doesn't want to be impressed. They want to be understood. So instead of trying to sound smart, try to sound like you've lived through the problem. That's the hook that actually converts. The Marketing Execution Podcast is produced by Growth Stage Marketing. We are on a mission to see your company reach wild success using marketing pods.
Too big, accept dreams. Catch the buzz and join the execution. Marketing Convo.
Thank you for listening and being a part of the marketing execution movement and community. To learn how growth stage marketing clients reach more buyers and drive business impact, go to growthstage.marketing. That's growthstage.marketing.